My daughter-in-law accidentally handed me my son's lunchbox, and that simple mistake revealed a plot so dark it nearly stopped my own heart. A retired nurse sitting next to me saw the contents turn pale as a sheet and whispered, "Bernie, you need to find your son right now or he is going to be dead within the hour." I asked her why. She looked me in the eye and said, "That is not seasoning in his food, Bernie. That is poison." What I found when I tracked him down on the side of the highway is something no father should ever have to see. My name is Bernard Freeman, but everyone calls me Bernie. I am 72 years old, and to the world, I am just a retired old man who plays chess at the community center and drives a beat-up Ford truck. My daughter-in-law Brittany sees me as a senile nuisance, a relic that takes up space. She thinks I spent my life pushing papers at some boring government desk. She never asked what I actually did for 30 years at the Department of Justice. She never knew that I was a lead toxicologist, a man who spent decades analyzing the chemical compounds used by killers to silence their victims without leaving a trace. She saw a frail old man, but she didn't know she was handing the evidence of her crime to the one person on Earth equipped to catch her. It was a Tuesday, the kind of humid morning that makes your joints ache. I was sitting at my usual table at the community center, the chessboard set up between me and Mrs. Eunice. Eunice is a sharp-tongued woman who spent 40 years working the night shift in the emergency room. We were mid-game and I was winning when the double doors swung open and Brittany stormed in like a hurricane wrapped in spandex. She was dressed for her yoga class, holding a sleek, expensive bento box in one hand and her phone in the other. She didn't even look at me. She just marched over her eyes, glued to her screen, and shoved the lunchbox into my chest. "Bernie, take this," she snapped, not even bothering to say hello. Dante forgot his lunch on the counter again. "I am already late for my hot yoga session and I cannot drive all the way to his office. You have nothing to do today, right? Just drop it off for him." Before I could even answer, she grabbed the tote bag sitting next to my feet. It was a bag of canned goods I had brought for the food drive. "Thanks. I will take this for the recycling," she said, clearly not paying attention to what she was holding. She was just grabbing things frantic and self-absorbed. "Brittany. That is for the—" I started to say, but she was already spinning on her heel. "Just handle it. Bernie Dante needs to eat healthy. Do not let him buy that greasy street food. Bye." And just like that, she was gone, leaving me holding my son's lunch. I shook my head, feeling that familiar burn of disrespect in my chest. To her, I was just a delivery boy. I looked at the box. It was one of those clear containers packed with organic quinoa kale and a small glass jar of green herbal seasoning tucked in the corner. Brittany was obsessed with her image as a health influencer. She controlled everything Dante ate, claiming she was optimizing his biorhythms. I was about to pack up my chess pieces when Eunice reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She wasn't looking at the board anymore. She was staring at the lunchbox in my lap, specifically at that little glass jar of green herbs. "Let me see that," she whispered, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. I handed it to her, confused. "It is just some basil or oregano, Eunice. You know how Brittany is with her special blends." Eunice didn't laugh. She popped the lid of the container and unscrewed the small jar. She brought it to her nose and inhaled deeply. Immediately she recoiled, her face draining of all color. Her eyes went wide, filled with a terror that instantly set my nerves on edge. "Bernie, listen to me," she hissed, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "This is not basil. This is not oregano. I worked in the ER for 40 years. I know the smell of death when I encounter it." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my scientist brain starting to wake up from its retirement slumber. "It smells like digitalis," she said, the word hanging heavy in the air. "Foxglove. We used to see kids come in who had eaten the flowers in the woods. It causes cardiac arrest. It shuts down the heart, Bernie. If Dante eats this, he won't just get sick. He will die." The world seemed to stop spinning. I snatched the jar back and took a whiff. My olfactory senses, trained over decades of lab work, instantly recognized the underlying note. It was faint, masked by garlic powder and dried mint, but it was there. A bitter, earthy scent that didn't belong in a kitchen. Digitalis. A powerful heart medication in small doses, but a lethal poison in the amount packed into this jar. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a mistake. Brittany hadn't confused a spice jar. She had handed me a loaded gun pointed at my son's chest. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking. I dialed Dante's number. It rang and rang and rang. Then his voicemail picked up. "Hi, you have reached Dante Freeman, CEO of Biogen. Leave a message." "Dante, do not eat lunch," I shouted into the phone, not caring who was staring at me. "Do not touch the food Brittany made. Call me back immediately." I hung up and dialed again. Straight to voicemail. Panic started to claw at my throat. Dante usually ate lunch around noon. It was 11:45 a.m. If he was driving to a meeting or stuck in traffic, he might decide to snack early. "Where is he?" Bernie Eunice asked, grabbing her purse. "We need to find him." I remembered the family tracking app. 2 years ago, Dante had installed it on my phone saying, "Dad, you are getting older. I just want to make sure I can find you if you get lost." I had been offended at the time, but I kept it. Now I opened the app, praying it would work in reverse. I tapped on Dante's icon. The map loaded. A blue dot appeared. It wasn't at his office downtown. It was stationary on the I-95 overpass, miles from any exit. "He is not at work," I said, my voice dropping to a growl. "He is stopped on the highway." "Why would he be stopped on the highway?" Eunice asked. "He isn't moving," I said, standing up so fast my chair clattered to the floor. I grabbed the lunchbox, the evidence, and ran toward the door. Eunice was right behind me. I threw my truck into gear and peeled out of the parking lot. The old Ford engine roared, protesting the speed, but I pushed the pedal to the floor. I drove with the reckless desperation of a father who knows the clock is ticking. I weaved through traffic, honking at cars running a red light that had just turned. My mind was racing faster than the truck. Digitalis causes confusion, blurred vision, and then irregular heartbeats. If he had tasted it even just a little bit while driving, he could have crashed. Or worse, his heart could have just stopped. I merged onto I-95, scanning the shoulder. The traffic was thinning out. And then I saw it. About a mile ahead, Dante's silver sedan. It was pulled over haphazardly, the front right tire grinding into the dirt of the embankment. The hazard lights weren't on. The car was just dead. "Dante," I screamed, slamming on the brakes and skidding to a halt behind his car. I jumped out before the truck had fully stopped. I ran to the driver's side window. The glass was tinted, but I could see a silhouette slumped over the steering wheel. Dante opened the door. I pounded on the glass. No movement. I tried the handle. Locked. I peered closer, shielding my eyes from the sun. What I saw made my knees buckle. Dante was foaming at the mouth. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and his body was jerking with subtle, rhythmic convulsions. He wasn't dead, but he was dying. Right there in front of me. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I ran back to my truck, grabbed the heavy tire iron from under my seat, and sprinted back. I swung with everything I had. The glass shattered, raining diamonds over my son's lap. I reached in, unlocked the door, and ripped it open. The smell hit me instantly. Vomit. And beneath it, that faint, bitter smell of the herbs. An open Tupperware container was on the passenger seat, half-eaten. He had snacked on the way. He had ingested the poison. I dragged him out of the car, laying him on the asphalt. His skin was cold and clammy, his pulse thready and erratic. It was fluttering like a trapped bird. Ventricular fibrillation. His heart wasn't pumping, it was shivering. "Call 911. I yelled at the cars slowing down to gawk. I started CPR. My old joint screamed in protest, but I pushed down on his chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Stay with me, son. Stay with me. You are not going to let that woman win. You are not going to die today." I looked at his face, pale and gray, and a fury unlike anything I had ever felt took over. This wasn't a health issue. This was murder. And the woman who did this was probably stretching in a yoga studio right now, checking her watch, waiting for the call that would make her a rich widow. I pumped his chest until the sirens wailed in the distance. I pumped until the paramedics physically pulled me away. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, one of the EMTs looked at me. "Sir, does he have a history of heart disease?" "No," I gasped, breathless and shaking. "He was poisoned. Tell the doctors to check for digitalis. Tell them it is poison." The EMT looked at me like I was a crazy old man, skeptical and dismissive. But I grabbed his uniform. "I am a toxicologist. Treat him for digitalis toxicity, or he will die in your ambulance." He nodded, eyes wide, and slammed the doors. As the ambulance sped away, screaming toward the hospital, I stood alone on the side of the highway, my hands covered in my son's sweat and glass shards. I looked back at Dante's car. The poisoned lunch was still on the seat. I walked over, picked up the container, and sealed it. I walked back to my truck and placed it carefully in the glove box. Brittany thought she had cleaned up her tracks. She thought she had sent a senile old man to do her dirty work, but she had made a fatal calculation. She forgot that before I was a grandfather, before I was a retiree, I was the man who hunted monsters for a living. And now I was coming for her. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed with a sound that felt like a drill boring directly into my skull. I stood by the gurney, gripping the metal rail so hard my knuckles turned the color of ash. My son lay there, stripped to the waist wires, snake charmed across his chest, monitors screaming a rhythmic, terrifying song. Dante looked small. For a man who ran a multi-million-dollar biotech firm, a man who commanded boardrooms, he looked like a child broken by a fever dream. A young resident doctor who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days was shining a pen light into Dante's eyes. He clicked it off and scribbled something on a clipboard, shaking his head. "Sir, you need to step back," the doctor said, not even looking at me. "We are stabilizing him. It looks like a severe stroke brought on by stress and acute liver failure. We see this with high-powered executives. The body just gives out." I stepped forward, blocking his path to the computer. "It is not a stroke," I said, my voice low and steady, the voice I used to use when testifying in federal court. "And it is not his liver giving out on its own. He has been poisoned. You need to run a toxicology screen specifically for digoxin. Now." The doctor finally looked at me. He saw an old black man in a windbreaker and a baseball cap, dusty from the roadside. He saw a nuisance. He did not see a retired federal agent with 30 years of experience in chemical pathology. "Listen, Mr. Freeman," the doctor said, his tone dripping with that special kind of condescension reserved for the elderly. "I know you are upset, but we have run the standard panels. His troponin levels are elevated. His enzymes are chaotic. This is metabolic. Please let us do our jobs and go sit in the waiting room." I grabbed the doctor's arm. It was a violation of protocol, but I didn't care. "Look at the EKG," I snapped, pointing at the monitor. "Look at the scooped ST segments. Look at the yellow haloing he was complaining about before he lost consciousness. Those are not stroke symptoms. That is classic digitalis toxicity. If you treat him for a stroke, if you give him blood thinners or beta blockers without checking, you will stop his heart. Do you understand me? You will kill him." The doctor pulled his arm away, brushing off his white coat as if I had dirtied it. "Security," he called out, his voice flat. "You are making a mistake." I warned him, feeling the desperation clawing at my throat. I found the source. It was in his food. "Just run the test. It takes 10 minutes. "You read too many crime novels, Pops," the doctor sneered, turning his back on me. "We treat patients based on medical science, not conspiracy theories from grieving fathers." I was about to lunge at him to physically force him to listen when the automatic doors to the ER bay slid open with a violent whoosh. The sound of heels clicking rapidly on the linoleum floor echoed through the trauma center. "Dante. Oh my God, Dante." It was Brittany. She burst into the room like a tragic heroine in a daytime soap opera. Her yoga clothes were perfectly disheveled. Her mascara was smeared just enough to look devastated, but not enough to look ugly. She threw herself onto the other side of the gurney, weeping loudly, grabbing Dante's limp hand and pressing it to her cheek. "Baby, please wake up," she sobbed, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I told you to slow down. I told you were working too hard." The doctor's demeanor changed instantly. He softened. He walked over to her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, are you the wife?" "Yes," she wailed, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled blue eyes. "I am Brittany. Is he okay? Tell me he is going to be okay." "We are doing everything we can," the doctor said gently. "We believe it was a massive stroke induced by stress." I stepped around the gurney. "Tell him the truth, Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through her performance. "Tell him what you put in that jar of herbs." Brittany stopped crying instantly. She snapped her head toward me, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. She stood up, blocking me from Dante, puffing out her chest. "You," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger in my face. "This is your fault. You did this." "My fault?" I asked, stunned by her audacity. "Yes, your fault," she screamed, turning to the doctor. "He has been harassing Dante for months, asking for money, demanding attention. He stresses him out constantly. I bet you caused a scene today, didn't you, Bernie? I bet you got him worked up and his heart just couldn't take it." She turned back to Dante, stroking his forehead. My poor baby. Your father just won't let you live in peace. The doctor looked at me with open hostility now. Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave. You are upsetting the family. I am his father, I roared, losing my composure. And she is lying. She handed me the lunchbox. She gave me the poison. Check the lunchbox. Brittany let out a high-pitched shriek of disbelief. Oh my God, he is senile. He is losing his mind. Doctor, you have to get him out of here. He is dangerous. 2 security guards appeared at the doorway, big men with bored expressions. I am not leaving my son, I said, planting my feet. Brittany reached into her designer purse. She pulled out a folded document, crisp and official. She thrust it at the doctor. I have power of attorney, she announced, her voice suddenly devoid of any tremor. I have his medical proxy. We signed it last week because we were worried about something like this happening with his father. The doctor took the paper, scanned it, and nodded. It looks to be in order. Mrs. Freeman is the legal decision-maker here. She turned to me, a cruel satisfaction playing on her lips. I want him removed, now. He is not allowed near my husband. He is not allowed access to any medical records. Get him out of my sight. The security guards moved in. One grabbed my left arm, the other my right. I struggled, but I was 72 years old and exhausted. You are making a mistake, I yelled at the doctor as they began to drag me backward. She is killing him. Run the test. Brittany stepped in front of the doctor, effectively shielding him from my words. She placed a hand on the doctor's arm, guiding him away from me, back toward the monitors. I am so sorry about him, doctor. I heard her say, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He has dementia. He gets confused. Just focus on Dante. No, I screamed, my heels skidding on the floor. Dante. Can you hear me? Fight it, son. They dragged me through the double doors out into the waiting room and then through the main exit into the humid night air. They threw me onto the sidewalk like a bag of trash. Do not come back inside, old man, or we will call the cops, one of the guards muttered before turning around. The automatic glass doors slid shut, but they didn't close completely right away. Through the gap, I could see back into the trauma bay. I saw the doctor approach Brittany. He lowered his head. He was giving her bad news. He was telling her that the prognosis was grim, that Dante might not wake up, that his organs were failing. I watched Brittany. She brought a tissue to her eyes, dabbing at tears that weren't there. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She looked down at the screen, and then I saw it. It lasted less than a second, but to a trained observer it was as bright as a flare. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a tremble of grief, it was a smirk. A cold, calculated smile of victory. She typed a quick message, hit send, and then looked back up at the doctor, her face returning to a mask of tragic sorrow. She wasn't mourning. She was updating her accomplice. I stood there on the concrete, the sirens of incoming ambulances wailing in the distance, realizing the full weight of my failure. I had been outmaneuvered. I had the truth, but she had the power. She had the law. She had the doctors. But she had made one critical error. She had let me walk away. She thought she had won by kicking an old man out of a hospital. She didn't realize that by locking me out, she had forced me to go rogue. I wasn't going to fight her in the hospital anymore. I was going to fight her in the one place she thought was safe. I turned my back on the hospital and walked toward the taxi stand. I wasn't going home to my empty apartment. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold metal of the spare key Dante had given me 2 years ago. The key to his house. The key to the crime scene. Brittany was busy playing the grieving wife. That meant the house was empty. And inside that house, buried in her kitchen or hidden in her trash, was the evidence I needed to put a noose around her neck. Driver, I said, opening the door of the first cab in line, take me to Oak Creek Estates. And hurry. The taxi ride to Oak Creek Estates felt like a funeral procession for the man I used to be. I sat in the back seat watching the manicured lawns and high fences roll by, realizing that I was about to commit a felony. I was about to break into my son's home. The driver pulled up to the curb, eyeing me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why an old man with blood on his shirt was visiting the richest neighborhood in the county. I paid him in cash and waited until his taillights disappeared around the bend before I moved. The house loomed in front of me, a modern fortress of glass and steel that Brittany had insisted they buy. It was cold, imposing, and right now completely silent. I walked up the driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't go to the front door. I went around the side, pushing through the expertly trimmed hedges to the back patio. There in the corner sat a large ceramic pot holding a withered hydrangea. Dante had shown me this spot 2 years ago, winking as he buried a spare key in the dirt. "Just in case, Dad," he had said. I dug my fingers into the cold soil, praying Brittany hadn't found it. My fingertips brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out, wiped it on my pants, and slid it into the lock of the back door. It turned with a smooth, silent click. I stepped inside, and immediately the security panel on the wall began its rhythmic, high-pitched beeping. I had 30 seconds before the siren wailed and the police were summoned. I froze, staring at the keypad. Brittany changed passwords like she changed shoes. But Dante was a creature of habit. I punched in the numbers of his mother's birthday. The system let out a long, angry tone. Incorrect. My hands started to sweat. 15 seconds. I tried his wedding anniversary. Incorrect. 10 seconds. I closed my eyes, trying to think like my son. What was the one thing Brittany couldn't touch? The one thing that was just his? I punched in the date he graduated from college, the day he started his company. The beeping stopped. The little light turned green. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was in. I was a ghost in my son's house. I moved straight to the kitchen. This was Brittany's domain, a gleaming expanse of white marble and stainless steel that looked more like an operating theater than a place to cook meals. It was spotless, terrifyingly so. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pair of latex gloves I had swiped from the hospital supply cart on my way out. I snapped them on. I wasn't a father snooping anymore. I was a toxicologist processing a scene. I opened the pantry. It was lined with rows of identical glass jars, all filled with powders and herbs. None of them had commercial labels. Brittany insisted on buying in bulk and decanting everything into her aesthetic containers. She labeled them with a label maker in a neat sans serif font. Turmeric, spirulina, ashwagandha, the arsenal of the modern wellness warrior. Or the perfect camouflage for a poisoner. I began to work. I took small squares of aluminum foil from the drawer and a spoon. I moved methodically. I opened the jar labeled green tea blend. I took a sample, folded the foil, and marked it. I moved to the peppercorns, then the protein powder. Everything looked normal to the naked eye, but poison implies betrayal. It hides in plain sight. Then I reached for the salt cellar sitting by the stove. It was filled with pink Himalayan salt, coarse and chunky. But as I sifted through the grains with the tip of the spoon, the light from the window caught something. Amidst the pink rocks, there were smaller, cloudier crystals. They were uniform, slightly more opaque than the salt. I wet the tip of my gloved finger and touched one, bringing it close to my eyes. It wasn't salt. Salt cubes. These were fractured shards. I carefully scooped a generous amount into a foil packet. If my suspicion was correct, this wasn't just salt. This was a long-game poison. Something to weaken him over months, to damage his kidneys and confuse his doctors, making the final blow look like natural organ failure. I secured the samples in my jacket pocket. My chest was tight. I was standing in the middle of a crime scene that masqueraded as a domestic paradise. Every meal she had cooked him, every smoothie she had blended was a loaded weapon. I looked at the fridge. There was a photo of them in Hawaii, smiling, tanned, happy. It made me sick. I wanted to smash it, but I had to leave no trace. I was about to turn off the lights when I saw the shredder in the corner of the room near the small desk where Brittany managed her social media empire. I walked over to the shredder. The bin was full. I pulled it out. It was a cross-cut shredder, the kind that turns paper into confetti, making reconstruction nearly impossible. But sitting right on top of the pile of white strips was something different. A thick cream-colored paper stock. It hadn't been shredded properly. The machine had jammed, leaving a large, jagged chunk of a document intact near the blades. I carefully pulled it free. It was the bottom third of a legal document. I smoothed it out on the counter. My eyes scanned the legalese, skipping over the boilerplate text until I hit the numbers. The dollar sign was followed by 7 zeros. $10 million. It was a life insurance policy. The ink on the signature line was barely dry. It was dated 3 months ago. I recognized Dante's signature immediately, a looping, rushed scrawl he used when he was busy, but right below it was the beneficiary designation. Brittany Freeman. 100%. I looked closer at the clauses visible on the fragment. There was a section highlighted in yellow highlighter, Brittany's doing, no doubt. Double indemnity for accidental death or sudden medical event prior to age 40. The room spun. $10 million. That was the price tag she had put on my son's life. She hadn't just planned to kill him. She had planned to get rich doing it. She had insured him like a racehorse she intended to break. The sheer cold-blooded calculation of it took my breath away. She had waited for the policy to clear the contestability period. She had waited until everything was legal, signed, and sealed before she handed me that lunchbox. I folded the paper fragment and shoved it into my pocket with the samples. I had the weapon, and now I had the motive. I had enough to go to the police. I had enough to bury her. I turned to leave my hand reaching for the back doorknob when I heard it. The sound of a car engine in the driveway. The heavy thud of a luxury SUV door slamming shut. I froze. My watch said it was 2:00 p.m. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be at the hospital weeping over her husband's comatose body. She was supposed to be playing the role of the grieving wife for the doctors. Why was she back? The front door lock clicked. The electronic deadbolt whirred and disengaged. I looked around frantically. The kitchen was an open plan. There was nowhere to hide. If I went out the back door now, the alarm chime would sound, alerting her instantly. I was trapped. "Honey, are you sure we have time?" A male voice boomed from the foyer. It was deep, rough, and unfamiliar. It definitely wasn't one of Dante's business partners. "We have time." Brittany's voice floated down the hallway, light and airy, completely devoid of the tears she had shed an hour ago. "The old man is kicked out and Dante is a vegetable. We have all the time in the world." Footsteps, heavy boots striking the hardwood floor. They were walking toward the kitchen. I scrambled backward, my eyes darting for an exit. The only way out of their line of sight was the hallway leading to the master bedroom. I sprinted on the balls of my feet, silent as a shadow. I ducked into the bedroom just as they walked into the living area. I scanned the room. The bed was made. The windows were locked. The ensuite bathroom had no exit. The closet. I dove into the walk-in closet, pulling the heavy sliding door shut until only a sliver of light remained. I buried myself behind a rack of Dante's suits, the smell of his cologne clinging to the fabric, filling my nose, making my eyes sting. I crouched down in the darkness, my heart thudding so loudly I was terrified they would hear it through the wood. The bedroom door opened. "He is not going to wake up, is he?" the man asked. Brittany laughed. A cruel, sharp sound. "Even if he does, his brain is fried. The dosage was massive. I made sure of it. Now stop talking about him. Come here." I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching the evidence in my pocket, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that they wouldn't open the closet door. I was trapped in the dark with the monsters, and for the first time in my life I was terrified of what I was about to hear. I pressed my back against the cold cedar paneling of the closet, the hangers digging into my shoulder blades like bony fingers. Through the thin slats of the louvered door I had a fractured view of the master bedroom. It was a space my son had designed for comfort, a sanctuary of neutral tones and soft fabrics, but now it felt like the waiting room of a slaughterhouse. The door to the bedroom swung open, hitting the stopper with a dull thud. Brittany walked in first. She didn't look like a woman whose husband was fighting for his life in a trauma bay. She looked energized, prowling the room with a predatory grace. Following her was a mountain of a man I recognized instantly. Gavin. He was Dante's personal trainer, a man my son paid $200 an hour to help him build muscle. He was wearing a tight tank top that showed off his steroid-pumped arms and a pair of expensive sunglasses perched on his shaved head. He didn't look worried. He looked impatient. He kicked the door shut with his heel and leaned against it, crossing his massive arms. So he asked, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Is he dead yet?" I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. My hand, hidden in my jacket pocket, tightened around the foil packet of poisoned salt until my knuckles ached. Brittany tossed her purse onto the bed, Dante's bed, and let out a sigh of frustration. "No," she said, her voice sharp and annoyed. "He is not dead. He is stable, whatever that means. The doctor said he is in a critical state, unresponsive." Gavin scoffed, walking over to the dresser and picking up Dante's watch, inspecting it like he was shopping. "You said the lunch would finish him. You said 80 milligrams mixed with the salt over a week plus the booster and the herbs would stop his heart on the highway." I miscalculated the metabolic rate, she snapped, pacing the room. Or maybe he didn't eat all of it. The lunchbox wasn't empty when that meddling old man took it. The mention of me made my blood run cold. They were discussing the murder of my son with the casual irritation of a couple discussing a botched dinner reservation. "So what now?" Gavin asked, putting the watch on his own wrist and turning it in the light. "If he wakes up, we are screwed, Britt. He is going to know something is wrong. He was complaining about the taste of his water yesterday. He is not going to wake up." Brittany said, her voice dropping to a chillingly calm register. She walked over to Gavin and placed her hands on his chest. The digitalis dose was massive, Gavin. Even if his heart keeps beating, his brain has been starved of oxygen for too long. He is a vegetable. And honestly, that is better for us. Better? Gavin asked, raising an eyebrow. Dead means the insurance pays out immediately. Dead means we take the 10 million and disappear to Tulum. Dead means an autopsy. Brittany countered, her eyes flashing, especially with his father sniffing around. You saw Bernie at the hospital. He was raving about poison. He was screaming about tests. If Dante dies today, that old man will burn the precinct down until they cut Dante open and check his blood. And if they find the digoxin, we go to prison for life. I held my breath. She was smarter than I gave her credit for. She had anticipated my reaction perfectly. So we keep him alive? Gavin asked, confused. We keep him alive for exactly 90 days, Brittany explained, a cruel smile playing on her lips. She walked over to the nightstand and picked up a framed photo of her and Dante staring at it with contempt. Under the company bylaws, if the CEO is incapacitated for more than 3 months, the power of attorney kicks in fully. I get total control of the assets, the patents, and the bank accounts. I can liquidate the company, sell the intellectual property to that Chinese firm that has been emailing him, and drain the trust. And then Gavin asked. And then, she said, placing the photo face down on the wood, he catches a sudden infection. Pneumonia. Sepsis. It happens all the time to comatose patients. We pull the plug, cremate the body before Bernie can file a motion, and we walk away with everything. No autopsy, no investigation, just a tragic widow and her inheritance. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. This wasn't just a crime of passion or a desperate act for insurance money. This was a corporate takeover disguised as a tragedy. She wanted to strip Dante of his life's work before she stripped him of his life. She wanted to sell off his genius for parts and leave me with a jar of ashes. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with a greedy daughter-in-law. I was dealing with a sociopath. Gavin laughed, a low, ugly sound. You are wicked, babe. I love it. He reached out and pulled her close. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. I did this for us, she whispered. 3 months, Gavin. We just have to play the part for 3 months. I will go to the hospital every day, hold his limp hand, cry for the nurses, and tell everyone how much I miss him. And while I am doing that, you will be prepping the house for the sale. They kissed. It was a hungry, violent sound that filled the quiet room. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the image, trying to block out the reality that they were celebrating my son's destruction in the very sanctuary he had built for them. They fell onto the bed. The springs creaked under their combined weight. I heard the sound of clothes rustling, zippers unzipping, the murmurs of lust that had no place in a house of mourning. I crouched lower in the closet, burying my face in the wool of Dante's winter coats to stifle the sound of my own breathing. I was trapped. If I tried to leave now, they would see me. If I stayed, I risked a sneeze, a cramp, anything that would give me away. And if Gavin found me here, he wouldn't hesitate. He was young, strong, and already an accomplice to murder. He would snap my neck and claim I broke in and attacked them. I waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sounds from the bedroom were a torture I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I focused on the evidence in my pocket. The salt, the herbs, the shredded paper. This was my shield. This was my weapon. I just had to get it out of this house. Finally, the movement on the bed stopped. I need a shower, Gavin announced, his voice heavy with sleep. Me too, Brittany replied. Let's make it quick. I have to go back to the hospital and make sure the nurses aren't letting Bernie in. I heard them get up. I heard the bathroom door open and the heavy thud of footsteps on the tile. Then the sound of the shower turning on the rush of water loud enough to drown out the noise of an old man escaping. This was my chance. I pushed the closet door open, wincing as the rollers squeaked faintly. I froze, but the water kept running. I stepped out into the bedroom. The bed was a mess of tangled sheets, a visual insult to my son. I averted my eyes and moved toward the window on the far wall. It was a second-story window overlooking the backyard. I unlocked the latch and slid it upward. It moved smoothly. Dante maintained his house well. I popped the screen out, careful not to let it clatter onto the roof of the patio below. I looked down. It was a 15-foot drop to the grass, too high for a 72-year-old man with bad knees. But to the right, running down the side of the brickwork, was a sturdy copper drain pipe. I swung my leg over the sill. The cool air hit my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. I grabbed the drain pipe with both hands. It felt cold and slick. I tested my weight. It held. I took a deep breath. I hadn't done this since basic training in Quantico 50 years ago. I swung my body out of the window, wrapping my legs around the pipe. The metal bit into my inner thighs. My shoulders screamed in protest. I began to slide down inch by inch. The friction burned my palms. My muscles trembled, threatening to give out. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the ground. 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet. Suddenly, my foot slipped. I lost my grip. I fell the last 5 feet, landing hard on the soft earth of the flower bed. Pain shot up my right leg, a sharp hot lance of agony in my ankle. I bit down on my lip to keep from crying out. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the open window. The shower was still running. They hadn't heard me. I forced myself up. My ankle throbbed, but it held my weight. I limped across the lawn, keeping to the shadows of the hedges. I didn't look back. I made it to the street to where the taxi had dropped me off, but of course the taxi was gone. I was alone in the suburbs, miles from safety, carrying the evidence of a capital crime in my pocket. I checked my phone. My battery was at 12%. I needed to get to a secure location. I needed a lab. I started walking, my limp becoming a rhythmic march. I wasn't going to the police station. Not yet. Brittany had the legal paperwork. She had the narrative. If I went to the cops now, she would claim I planted the evidence, that I was a senile father acting out of grief. I needed scientific proof. I needed undeniable, irrefutable data. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. It rang twice. "Hello," a gruff voice answered. "Frank, it is Bernie," I said, my voice breathless. "Do not ask me how I am. I need access to the private lab. Tonight. And I need you to clear the mass spectrometer. Bernie." "You are retired. What is going on?" "I am not retired anymore, Frank," I said, reaching the main road and flagging down a passing Uber. "I am working a homicide, and the victim is my son." I got into the car and gave the driver the address of the industrial park on the other side of town. As we drove away, I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, covered in garden soil and rust from the pipe. But for the first time since Brittany handed me that lunchbox, I didn't feel helpless. I felt dangerous. Brittany wanted a war. She wanted to play games with medicine and law. She didn't know she had just declared war on a man who wrote the book on forensic toxicology. She gave me 3 months to save my son. I only needed 3 days to destroy her. 2 days after I fled my son's house with pockets full of poisoned salt, I received a call that Dante had regained consciousness. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for the lab results from Frank, which were still processing in the mass spectrometer. I drove straight to the hospital, parking my truck 3 blocks away to avoid the security guards who had tossed me out like garbage. I slipped in through the loading dock, blending in with the delivery crew, my heart hammering a rhythm of hope and terror against my ribs. I made it to the ICU floor unnoticed. The nurse at the station was distracted, typing furiously. I slipped into room 402. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in a sickly gray twilight. Dante was propped up on pillows, his skin the color of old parchment, his eyes open but unseeing. He was staring at the ceiling tiles as if they held the secrets of the universe. "Dante," I whispered, stepping closer. "It is me. It is Dad." He turned his head slowly, the movement jerky and uncoordinated. His eyes tried to focus on my face, but they slid away, unable to lock on. There was no recognition in them, no spark, just a glassy, drug-induced haze. "Who?" he croaked, his voice a dry rasp. "It is your father's son," I said, reaching out to take his hand. His skin was cold, clammy. "I need you to listen to me. You are in danger. Brittany did this to you." He frowned, a look of genuine confusion knitting his brow. "Brittany? Where is Brittany?" "She said she would bring me water." "She is not bringing you water, Dante. She is bringing you death. You have to fight this. Do not eat anything she gives you. Do not drink anything." The door to the bathroom swung open. Brittany stepped out. She wasn't wearing her yoga clothes today. She was dressed in a modest, dark blue dress, her hair pulled back, the very picture of a concerned, exhausted wife. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before narrowing into slits of pure malice. Then the performance began. "Oh, thank God," she gasped, rushing to Dante's side and placing herself physically between us. "Dante, baby, are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Dante looked from her to me, his expression bewildered. He is yelling. Brittany. My head hurts. I wasn't yelling, but to his poisoned, foggy brain, my urgency must have sounded like aggression. I know, baby. I know, she cooed, stroking his hair. Your dad is having one of his days. He is confused again. She looked at me, her face a mask of tragic pity. Dad, please. You need to leave. You are upsetting him. He doesn't even know who you are right now. The stress is going to kill him. He doesn't know me because you drugged him. I shouted the control I had fought so hard to maintain, snapping. You are erasing him! Security! Brittany screamed, pressing the panic button on the wall. Help! He is attacking us! Dante flinched, pulling away from me, fear in his eyes. Dad, stop! He whimpered. Just stop. That broke me. Seeing my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the man I watched build an empire, look at me with fear. She had taken his mind. She had stolen his trust. 2 burly guards burst into the room. This time I didn't fight. I looked at Dante one last time. I will come back for you, I promised. I will fix this. As they escorted me out, a man in a cheap suit was waiting in the hallway. He stepped into my path and thrust a thick envelope into my chest. Bernard Freeman, he said, his voice bored. You have been served. I looked down at the papers. In bold black letters at the top it read, Emergency motion for conservatorship and temporary restraining order. She wasn't just kicking me out of the hospital, she was kicking me out of my son's life. The hearing was scheduled for the very next morning. Emergency family court. The speed of it made my head spin. It takes weeks to get a hearing for a parking ticket, but Brittany had managed to get a judge to review the custody of a human being in less than 24 hours. That meant money. That meant influence. I stood in the courtroom the next day wearing my only suit, a navy blue number that smelled faintly of mothballs. I stood alone. On the other side of the aisle, Brittany sat flanked by 3 lawyers in Italian suits. She looked small, fragile, wiping her eyes with a tissue every few minutes. Her lead attorney, a shark named Vance, who I recognized from the billboards downtown, stood up. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth as oil. We are here today because of a tragedy. My client's husband, Dante Freeman, has suffered a catastrophic medical event. He is currently incapacitated, unable to make decisions for himself or his company. He paused for effect, looking at the judge, a tired-looking woman named Judge Holloway. Normally, the family would pull together in such times. However, we are facing a secondary crisis. Mr. Freeman's father, Bernard, is suffering from advanced cognitive decline. He has become paranoid, aggressive, and violent. He believes his son was poisoned. He has broken into their home. He has caused scenes at the hospital that endangered the patient's life. That is a lie, I shouted, standing up. I broke in to get evidence. Judge Holloway looked at me over her glasses. Mr. Freeman, sit down. You will have your turn. Vance smiled, a thin, predatory expression. We have evidence, Your Honor. Exhibit A. He pointed to a large monitor on the wall. A video began to play. It was grainy, taken from a cell phone. It showed me standing in Dante's living room, red-faced, screaming at the top of my lungs, slamming my fist onto the coffee table. You are blind. You are absolutely blind. Look at what is happening right in front of you. If you do not open your eyes, it is all going over a cliff. The video cut to black. The courtroom was silent. It looked bad. It looked like an unhinged old man screaming at his son. But I remembered that day. It was Super Bowl Sunday 3 years ago. I wasn't screaming at Dante. We were both screaming at the television because the referee had made a terrible call against our team. Brittany had been filming us laughing in the background, but the audio had been edited. Her laughter was gone. The context was stripped away. All that remained was my anger directed at an invisible target that the court now assumed was my son. That video is doctored, I protested, my voice shaking. We were watching football. Vance ignored me. Exhibit B, Your Honor. A psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Eris Thorne. He handed a file to the judge. I had never met a Dr. Eris Thorne in my life. Dr. Thorne reviewed Mr. Bernard Freeman's medical history and recent behavioral patterns, Vance said. His conclusion is clear. Early onset dementia with persecutory delusions. He believes there is a conspiracy against him. He believes he is a detective. It is a tragedy, Your Honor. But he is a danger to himself and, more importantly, to his son. The judge flipped through the pages. I could see her face hardening. She saw a frantic old man in a cheap suit raving about poison. She saw a crying young wife trying to save her husband. The narrative was perfect. It was cleaner than any crime scene I had ever processed. I stood up, my hands trembling on the table. Your Honor, I am a toxicologist. I served 30 years with the DOJ. I have samples in a lab right now being tested. This woman is feeding him digitalis. She has an insurance policy for $10 million. Mr. Freeman, the judge, cut me off, her voice stern. Do you have these test results with you? They are not ready yet, I stammered. Mass spectrometry takes time. I need 24 more hours. So, you have no proof, the judge said. Just theories. And you admit to breaking into their home. I used a spare key, I said, feeling the trap snap shut. To get the evidence. Breaking and entering, Vance muttered loud enough for the stenographer to hear. The judge sighed, rubbing her temples. She looked at Brittany, who was now quietly sobbing into her hands. Mrs. Freeman, I am granting the emergency conservatorship. You will have full legal control over your husband's medical decisions and his estate for a period of 30 days pending a full review. Brittany nodded, mouthing a thank you. Furthermore, the judge continued, looking at me with pity that felt like a slap. I am granting the restraining order. Mr. Bernard Freeman, you are to stay 100 yards away from Dante Freeman and Brittany Freeman. You are not to contact them, visit the hospital or the residence. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. The gavel banged. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. No, I screamed, the injustice of it burning through my veins like acid. You are signing his death warrant. She is killing my son. You are letting her kill him. I scrambled over the barrier, lunging toward the plaintiff's table, desperate to make them listen, desperate to shake the truth into them. Bailiff, the judge shouted. 2 uniformed officers grabbed me before I could take 3 steps. They wrenched my arms behind my back, forcing me to my knees. Pain shot through my shoulders, but I didn't care. I looked up at Brittany. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking down at me, her blue eyes dry and cold as ice. She offered me a small, tight smile. A smile that said, I won. She is killing him. I roared as they dragged me backward out of the courtroom. Check the salt! Check the damn salt! The heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off my voice. I was thrown into the hallway, breathless, defeated, and legally erased from my son's life. I had the truth, but in the eyes of the law, I was just a crazy old man who watched too much football. And now my son was alone in a room with his executioner, and I was powerless to stop it. The judge had taken my rights, but she could not take my knowledge, and she certainly could not take the evidence burning a hole in my pocket. I drove home in a silence that was heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that usually precedes a funeral. But I was not planning a funeral, I was planning a resurrection. I pulled my truck into the garage and closed the door, plunging the space into darkness before killing the engine. I sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal, letting the rage settle into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Brittany thought she had won because she had a piece of paper with a court seal. She did not understand that the courtroom was just theater. The real verdict would be delivered in the laboratory. I locked the front door of my small bungalow and drew the blinds. I checked the street. Empty. I walked to the heavy oak door in the hallway that led to the basement. I hadn't been down there in months, not since I packed away the last of my files after retirement. I flipped the switch. The fluorescent lights flickered and hummed to life, illuminating a space that looked less like a storage room and more like a bunker. This was my sanctuary. Along one wall stood a stainless steel workbench I had salvaged from a government surplus auction. On the shelves above it were rows of brown glass reagent bottles, dust-covered but sealed. In the corner under a plastic tarp sat my pride and joy, a high-powered compound microscope with polarized light capabilities and a vintage but functional spectrophotometer. I pulled the tarp off the plastic, rustling loudly in the quiet room. Dust motes danced in the light. I grabbed a rag and wiped down the lenses. I wasn't just cleaning equipment, I was waking up the old soldier inside me. I set the foil packets on the steel table, the salt, the herbs, the shredded paper. I snapped on a fresh pair of latex gloves and pulled a clean glass slide from a box. I started with the salt. I sprinkled a few grains onto the slide, adding a drop of distilled water to dissolve the sodium chloride, hoping to isolate the impurities. I slid it under the lens and adjusted the focus. The world magnified 400 times is a chaotic, beautiful place, but today it looked like a battlefield. Himalayan salt crystals are cubic, roughly shaped and transparent with a pinkish hue. But swimming among them were different structures. They were not cubic. They were octahedral. 8-sided crystals that refracted the light differently than salt. I reached for a bottle of silver nitrate. If this was just salt, the reaction would be standard. If it was what I suspected, the color would tell the story. I added a single drop to the solution on the slide. I held my breath. The liquid turned a distinct brick-red color. Arsenic. I stepped back from the table, my hand going to my mouth. Arsenic trioxide, the poison of kings and the king of poisons. It is tasteless, odorless, and mimics 100 different natural illnesses. It causes fatigue, headaches, confusion, and nerve damage. Dante had been complaining about being tired for months. He had told me he was just burned out from work. He wasn't burned out. He was being slowly, methodically murdered. Brittany hadn't just decided to kill him last week with the lunchbox. She had been poisoning him for a long time, weakening him, breaking down his resistance so that when the heart attack finally came, nobody would question why a 38-year-old man simply dropped dead. I felt a tear run down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. There was no time for grief. I grabbed the second packet, the green herbal blend from the lunchbox. I didn't need a chemical test for this. I placed a pinch under the scope. The plant matter was shredded fine, but the cellular structure was distinct. The tiny hairs on the leaves, the specific vein patterns. It was digitalis purpurea, foxglove. But it wasn't just dried leaves. Mixed in with the green dust were tiny white granules. I did a solubility test. They dissolved instantly. Pure digoxin extract. She had spiked the natural poison with pharmaceutical-grade heart medication to ensure the job was done. This was overkill. This was hatred in powder form. I had the scientific proof. I knew the what and the how. But I still lacked the who. A court would argue that anyone could have tampered with the salt. They would say I planted it. I needed to see her doing it. I needed eyes inside a house I was legally forbidden to enter. I pulled my burner phone from a drawer. I dialed a number that wasn't in my contacts list. It rang 4 times before a young, wary voice answered. Yeah. Malik, it is, Bernie, I said. There was a pause. Then the tone shifted, softening with respect. Mr. Bernie, I haven't heard from you since the trial. Is everything good? No, Malik, everything is bad. I need a favor. A big one. I saved Malik 5 years ago. He was a 19-year-old kid with a keyboard and too much curiosity who had hacked into the city's traffic grid just to see if he could turn all the lights green. The feds wanted to bury him under the Patriot Act. I saw a kid who needed guidance, not a cage. I testified that he had no malicious intent, and I helped him get a plea deal that involved community service instead of prison. He owed me his freedom. I need you to come to my house, I said. Bring your laptop. The powerful one. I hung up. 30 minutes later, a sleek black motorcycle pulled into my driveway. Malik walked into my basement, his dreadlocks tied back, carrying a backpack that looked like it weighed 50 pounds. He looked around at the lab equipment and whistled low. You Breaking Bad down here, Mr. Bernie? He asked, a grin tugging at his lips. I am catching a killer, I said, my face grim. I pointed to the chair next to me. Sit down. I explained the situation. I told him about Dante, about Brittany, about the court order. I showed him the arsenic crystals on the monitor. Malik's smile vanished. He looked at the screen, then at me, his dark eyes hard. She is poisoning your boy, he asked, his voice quiet. Yes. And she has a smart home system. Cameras in every room. Alarm sensors on every window. She thinks she deleted everything, but she is sloppy. She thinks hitting delete makes data disappear. Malik cracked his knuckles and opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keys, typing commands faster than I could read them. What is the address? I gave it to him. Oak Creek Estates, he muttered. High-end security. Probably cloud-based with a local backup. Give me 10 minutes. I watched him work. It was a different kind of science, but it was just as precise as chemistry. He wasn't mixing fluids. He was piercing firewalls. He was looking for a backdoor, a weak password, a flaw in the code. Gotcha, he whispered 7 minutes later. She changed the admin password to her birthday. Amateurs. He hit a final key. The screen of his laptop split into a grid of 6 live feeds. The living room, the hallway, the backyard, and the kitchen. The house was quiet. Brittany wasn't in the kitchen. But that wasn't what I needed. Can you go back? I asked. Can you recover footage from the last month? Malik frowned. She wiped the local drive. I can see the log. Mass deletion event 2 days ago, right after you took the lunchbox. My heart sank. She had covered her tracks. But Malik said, tapping his temple, she forgot about the cloud mirror. These systems upload a backup to a remote server every night at 3 a.m., unless she has the master encryption key for the server farm, which she definitely does not. That footage is still sitting there. It just takes a little finesse to pull it down. He typed for another few minutes. A progress bar appeared on the screen. Retrieving archived data, 20%, 50%, 80%, complete. Files started populating a folder on his desktop, hundreds of them, dated and time-stamped. Look for the mornings, I said, leaning over his shoulder. Breakfast time. That is when she makes his smoothies. Malik scrolled. He clicked on a file dated 3 weeks ago, 7:30 a.m. The video player opened. The image was crisp, high-definition 4K resolution. It showed Brittany standing at the kitchen island. She was wearing a silk robe. She looked beautiful, serene. Dante walked into the frame dressed for work, looking tired. He kissed her on the cheek and sat at the counter checking his phone. Brittany turned her back to him. She opened the cupboard and took out a large tub of protein powder. She scooped some into a blender. Then she reached into the pocket of her robe. I held my breath. She pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. She didn't just dump a pill in. She poured several into a mortar and pestle sitting on the counter. She began to grind them. The sound was inaudible, but the motion was clear, violent, rhythmic. She is grinding them so he won't taste the texture, I whispered. She dumped the white powder into the blender with the protein and the fruit. She hit the button. The blender roared to life, mixing the poison into a frothy pink death cocktail. She poured it into a glass and turned around, a bright, loving smile plastered on her face. She handed the glass to Dante. "Here you go, baby," she said, her lips moving in the silent video. "Drink up. It is good for you." Dante took the glass. He smiled at her, a trusting, loving smile, and he drank. He drank the whole thing while she watched, her eyes cold and flat, monitoring him like a lab rat. I had to look away. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a burning mixture of grief and rage. I had watched my son drink poison from the hand of the woman he loved. "That is it," Malik said softly. "That is the smoking gun." We watched 3 more videos. It was a ritual. Every morning. Sometimes it was the smoothie. Sometimes she sprinkled something on his eggs. It was systematic. It was routine. "Can you download these?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I can do better," Malik said. "I can mirror them to a secure server she cannot touch. And I can lock her out of the system so she cannot delete them again." "Do it," I said. Malik worked his magic. I stood up and paced the small room. I had the chemical proof. I had the video evidence. I had everything I needed to go to the police. But as I looked at Brittany's face on the screen, smiling as she poisoned my son, I realized that prison wasn't enough. If I went to the police now, they would arrest her. There would be a trial. She would hire expensive lawyers. She would cry and claim postpartum depression or anxiety or some other excuse. She might even get a plea deal. And Dante would wake up to find his life shattered, his wife a monster, his trust broken. He would be a victim. No, I didn't want Dante to just be a survivor. I wanted him to be the one who ended it. I wanted him to see her for what she was, and I wanted him to be the one to twist the knife. I looked at the calendar on the wall. In 3 days, Biogen, Dante's company, was hosting its annual charity gala. It was the biggest event of the season. Brittany had been talking about it for months. She wanted to be the queen of the ball. She wanted to stand on stage next to her successful husband and play the role of the philanthropist power couple. That was where it had to happen, not in a quiet interrogation room, but there. In front of everyone she tried to impress. In front of the board members she wanted to control. "Malik," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Can you get into the audio system of the venue where Biogen is holding their gala?" Malik grinned, his eyes lighting up with mischief. "Mr. Burney, if it has a microchip, I can get into it. What do you have in mind?" I looked at the freeze frame of Brittany holding the poisoned glass. "I am going to put on a show," I said, "and it is going to be a blockbuster." Brittany didn't waste time mourning. She wasted time counting money that wasn't hers yet. Less than 24 hours after the judge handed her the conservatorship, Malik's surveillance system flagged a high-priority email chain from her personal account. I was sitting in my basement lab watching the code scroll down the monitor when Malik whistled low and spun his chair around. "Mr. Burney, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight. "She is having a fire sale." I leaned in, squinting at the screen. It was a draft contract between Brittany acting as conservator for Dante Freeman and Vortex Corp, Dante's biggest and most ruthless competitor. Vortex had been trying to buy Biogen for years, but Dante always refused. He knew they would strip the company for parts and bury his research on regenerative medicine research he believed could save millions of lives. It was his legacy. It was his soul on a hard drive. And Brittany was selling it for scraps. The purchase price listed was $5 million. It was an insult. The patents alone were worth 10 times that. But $5 million was the exact amount she could transfer to an offshore account without triggering an immediate federal audit if she categorized it as a liquidation of distressed assets. She wasn't trying to run the company. She was trying to cash out and run. She had booked a one-way private charter to the Cayman Islands for Friday night right after the charity gala. She was going to sell my son's life's work on Thursday, kill him on Friday, and be sipping Mai Tais on a beach by Saturday morning. The sheer velocity of her greed was breathtaking. She viewed Dante not as a husband but as a piñata she was frantically beating to get the candy before the police arrived. "Get Marshall on the phone," I told Malik, standing up and buttoning my cardigan. I wasn't going to let her sign that paper. Marshall Vance was an old friend, a lawyer who had retired from corporate litigation to fly fish in Montana, but he owed me a favor from a case involving poisoned trout in the 90s. I had called him the day Dante was hospitalized. He was the only man I knew who could navigate a boardroom as effectively as I navigated a crime scene. The emergency shareholder meeting was held at Biogen's headquarters downtown. Brittany had called it, citing exigent financial circumstances. She sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by two junior lawyers who looked like they were barely out of law school. Across from her sat the representatives from Vortex, looking like wolves who had just been invited into the sheep pen. I wasn't in the room. I was watching via the security camera feed Malik had hijacked. But Marshall was there. He walked in just as Brittany picked up a gold fountain pen to sign the deed of sale. "Stop," Marshall boomed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Brittany looked up, annoyed but not scared. "Who are you? This is a closed meeting." "Security." "I am Marshall Vance, representing the primary shareholder of Biogen," he said, tossing a leather-bound folio onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped inches from her hand. "And you do not have the authority to sell these assets." Brittany laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "My husband owns 51% of this company. I am his conservator. I have total authority." "Your husband owns 51% of the common stock," Marshall corrected, opening the folio. "But he does not own the preferred shares. Those belong to the angel investor who funded the initial startup capital 15 years ago. A silent partner who retained Class A voting rights, specifically the right to veto any sale of intellectual property or dissolution of the company." Brittany frowned, her confidence wavering. Dante never had an angel investor. He built this from his garage. "He built it with money provided by a silent backer," Marshall said. "A backer who liquidated his government pension and took a second mortgage on his home to give his son a chance to change the world." He pointed a finger at the camera in the corner of the room, looking directly at me. "That investor is Mr. Bernard Freeman." Brittany went pale. She grabbed the document, flipping through the pages frantically. Her eyes scanned the incorporation papers, the amendments, the shareholder registry. It was all there. Buried in the fine print of the company's founding documents was my name. I had hidden it well, even from Dante in the beginning, because I wanted him to feel like the victory was entirely his. I wanted him to walk tall, but I had kept the safety switch just in case he ever lost his way, or in case someone tried to steal his way from him. "This is fake," she whispered, her hands shaking. "The old man is broke. He drives a truck from the 90s. He lives in a shack. He lives modestly because he reinvested his dividends back into his son's dream," Marshall said, his voice cold. "He owns 30% of the preferred stock, and as his proxy I am formally exercising his veto. This sale is dead. Get out." The Vortex representatives didn't need to be told twice. They stood up, gathered their papers, and filed out of the room, casting angry glances at Brittany. They knew a botched deal when they saw one. Brittany was left alone at the table, the gold pen useless in her hand. She stared at the camera, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She realized in that moment that the senile old man she had mocked wasn't just watching her. He was checkmating her. She swept the papers off the table with a scream of frustration and stormed out. I sat back in my chair in the basement feeling a grim satisfaction. I had stopped the money. I had cut off her escape route. Now she was trapped. And a trapped animal is the most dangerous kind. I knew she would come. I sent Malik home telling him things were about to get ugly, and I didn't want him in the crossfire. I turned off the lights in the house, leaving only the desk lamp in the living room on. I brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea and sat in my armchair facing the front door. I placed my digital recorder on the side table, the red light blinking steadily in the darkness. It was just after midnight when headlights swept across my front window. A car door slammed. Heavy, angry footsteps pounded up the walkway. Bam! 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 The front door shook in its frame. She was kicking it. "Open the door, Bernie," she screamed. "I know you are in there. Open the damn door!" I took a sip of tea. It was hot and calming. I didn't move. She pounded again, harder this time. "You think you are clever. You think you can stop me with some dusty paperwork? That money is mine. I earned it. I put up with his boring stories and his late nights for 5 years. I deserve it." She was unraveling. The cool, calculating sociopath was gone, replaced by a desperate, greedy child who had been denied her prize. She paced back and forth on the porch, her heels clicking on the concrete like hail. "I am not going to let you win, old man. Do you hear me? I have the power. I have the judge in my pocket." I sat silent, a ghost in my own home. I wanted her to think I was afraid. I wanted her to feel powerful because arrogance makes people careless. The pounding stopped. There was a long silence. I watched the doorknob jiggle, locked. Then I heard the flap of the mail slot creak open. A slice of light from the street lamp cut across the floor. I saw her eyes appear in the narrow opening of the mail slot. They were wild, bloodshot, manic. She pressed her face against the brass plate, peering into the gloom of my living room. "Listen to me closely, Bernie," she hissed, her voice low and venomous, carrying through the house like a draft from a grave. I leaned forward slightly, ensuring the recorder caught every syllable. "You blocked the sale. Fine. But you forgot who has the keys to the castle. I am his conservator. I decide where he lives. I decide who treats him." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Tomorrow morning I am signing the discharge papers. I am bringing Dante home. The doctors say he is stable enough for home hospice care. But accidents happen at home, Bernie. Stairs are slippery. Wheelchairs tip over. Necks snap so easily when someone falls the wrong way." My grip tightened on the teacup until I felt the china hairline fracture under my thumb. "If you do not sign that waiver and release those shares by noon tomorrow, Dante is going to have a terrible accident. And this time there won't be any digitalis for you to find. Just a broken body at the bottom of the stairs. And I will make sure the casket is closed so you don't have to see his face." She spat through the slot. "You have 12 hours, old man. Sign the papers or bury your son." The mail slot snapped shut. I heard her walk back to her car, the engine roar to life, and the tires squeal as she peeled away into the night. I sat in the silence for a long time. The tea had gone cold. The threat hung in the room, heavy and suffocating. She wasn't bluffing. She was cornered, broke, and desperate. She was going to kill him tomorrow. The slow poison was over. She was moving to brute force. I picked up the recorder and pressed stop. I had the threat. I had the motive. I had the means. But the police would take hours to process this. They would need a warrant. They would need to interview her. By the time they got through the red tape, Dante would be dead at the bottom of a staircase. I couldn't wait for the law. The law was too slow for the timeline of a murder. I stood up and walked to the basement door. I looked at the calendar. The gala was in 2 days. She wanted to be the star. She wanted to play the grieving wife one last time before she cashed out. She wouldn't kill him before the gala if she thought she could still get the money another way. But she just told me she was done waiting. Unless I gave her a reason to wait. Unless I made her believe that she could have it all, the money, the fame, and the clean getaway, if she just kept him alive for 48 more hours. I needed to bait the trap. I needed to make her think she had won again. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marshall. "Wake up, Marshall," I said. "Draft the papers. Tell her I am ready to sign. Tell her I surrender. but tell her I will only hand over the stock transfer at the gala, publicly, as a symbolic passing of the torch." "Bernie, are you insane?" Marshall asked, his voice groggy. "No," I said, walking down the stairs to my lab, my eyes fixing on the bottles of chemical reagents lining the shelf. "I am just buying time. She wants a show. I will give her a show. But first I have to make a little visit to the hospital." I grabbed my kit bag. I wasn't going as a father this time. I was going as a ghost. I traded my dignity for a blue polyester jumpsuit and a mop bucket on wheels. The uniform was 2 sizes too big, smelling of industrial bleach and someone else's sweat, but it was the most effective camouflage in the world. People do not look at the janitor. They look through him. They see the trash bag, the wet floor sign, the gray cart, but they never see the man. I pulled the paper mask over my face, pulled my cap low, and pushed the cart through the service entrance of St. Jude's Medical Center. My ID badge was a forgery Malik had printed an hour ago, laminated and clipped to my chest. It said my name was Earl. I navigated the corridors with the slow, rhythmic shuffle of a man who is paid by the hour, but my mind was racing at 100 miles an hour. Brittany had moved Dante to the VIP wing on the top floor. It sounded luxurious, but I knew what it really was. It was a prison tower. It was isolation. She had hired private security to stand by the elevators and a private nurse to sit in his room. She wanted to control who saw him, who spoke to him. And most importantly, she wanted to control what went into his veins. I reached the elevators. A security guard, a young man more interested in his phone than his job, glanced at my badge. "Service," he grunted, pointing to the freight elevator. I nodded, not speaking, and rolled my cart inside. The doors closed, and for a moment the silence was heavy. I checked my pocket. I had a vial of saline solution I had prepared in the basement, labeled exactly like the sedative Brittany's nurse was administering. I had a tablet loaded with the videos Malik had pulled from the cloud, and I had a knife. I prayed I wouldn't have to use the knife. The elevator dinged on the 12th floor. The VIP wing was quiet, carpeted in plush beige that muffled the squeak of my cartwheels. I kept my head down, mopping imaginary spots on the pristine floor as I inched closer to room 1204. The door was open a crack. I could hear the rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor. I pushed the door open with the back of my mop. The room was spacious, filled with flowers that smelled like a funeral parlor. Dante was in the bed, looking paler and thinner than I had ever seen him. He was asleep, or what passed for sleep, under a heavy chemical haze. Sitting in the armchair by the window was the private nurse. She wasn't checking his vitals. She wasn't adjusting his pillows. She was scrolling through social media on her phone, her back to the patient, laughing softly at a video. I cleared my throat, making a show of squeezing out the mop. "Housekeeping," I mumbled, pitching my voice to sound old and tired, emptying the trash. She didn't even turn around. "Just make it quick," she snapped. "And do not wake him up. I just gave him his dose." She waved a hand dismissively. Perfect. She was arrogant. She assumed I was harmless. I rolled the cart into the room, positioning it between her chair and the IV stand next to Dante's bed. I blocked her line of sight with my body. I reached into the front pocket of my jumpsuit. My hand moved with the muscle memory of a man who had spent decades handling volatile chemicals. I grabbed the vial of sedative hanging from the IV drip. It was midazolam, a powerful benzodiazepine. It kept him docile. It kept him confused. It kept him from asking why his wife was selling his company. I unhooked it. In one smooth motion, I replaced it with the saline vial. It looked identical. The clear liquid dripped into the chamber, mixing with the fluid running into my son's arm. I slipped the real sedative into my pocket. The nurse shifted in her chair. I froze. "Are you done yet?" she asked, still looking at her phone. "Just about, ma'am," I said. I tied off the trash bag, creating a rustling noise to cover the sound of my breathing. I grabbed the bag and threw it onto the cart. I rolled out of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. Step 1 was complete. Now I had to wait. Saline does not wake a man up instantly. It just stops the suppression. His liver and kidneys, damaged as they were, would have to filter out the existing drugs. It would take an hour, maybe 2. I pushed my cart into the supply closet down the hall and locked the door from the inside. I sat on a stack of paper towels and watched the time tick by on my watch. I counted the minutes. I counted the beats of my own heart. I thought about the little boy who used to run into my arms when I came home from work. I thought about the man who built a company from a garage. I was not going to let him die in a drug-induced fog. 90 minutes later, the nurse left the room. I watched through the crack in the closet door. She was heading to the break room, coffee mug in hand. This was it. I left the cart. I left the mop. I walked straight into room 1204 and locked the door behind me. I dragged a heavy chair under the handle. If security came, they would have to break it down. I walked to the bed. Dante was stirring. His eyelids fluttered. He let out a low groan, shifting his legs under the sheets. The saline was working. The fog was lifting. Dante. I said, my voice sharp and commanding. Wake up. He opened his eyes. They were bloodshot, unfocused, but they were his eyes. He blinked, trying to clear the blur. He looked at the ceiling, then at the window, and finally at me. He frowned. Dad, he whispered. His voice was like gravel. Why are you wearing that? Do not ask questions, son. We do not have time. I need you to sit up. I need you to focus. He tried to push himself up, but his arms were weak. I grabbed him by the shoulders and hauled him upright, propping pillows behind his back. He looked at me, confusion warring with fear. Brittany said you were crazy, he said, slurring slightly. She said you attacked the doctors. Brittany is a liar, I said. I pulled the tablet from my jumpsuit. I did not come here to argue with you, Dante. I did not come here to tell you I told you so. I came here to show you the monster sleeping in your bed. I placed the tablet in his lap. I hit play. The video Malik had pulled from the cloud filled the screen. It was the footage from the kitchen. Brittany crushing the pills. Brittany mixing the powder into the smoothie. Brittany smiling as she handed him the poison. Dante watched in silence. His face went slack. He watched his wife, the woman he had married, the woman he adored, meticulously prepare his execution. That is not real, he whispered, shaking his head. That is a deepfake. She loves me. Keep watching, I said, my voice hard. The video changed. It was the footage from the bedroom. Brittany and Gavin, the laughter, the discussion about the 90 days, the plan to pull the plug, the plan to cremate him to hide the evidence. Dante's hands started to shake. The tablet rattled against his knees. He watched his wife kiss another man in his bed. He heard her call him a vegetable. He heard her laugh about spending his money. Then I played the audio recording from the night before. Brittany's voice hissing through my mail slot. The threat to push him down the stairs. The promise to kill him by noon today if I didn't sign the papers. Dante didn't scream. He didn't yell. He just stopped moving. He sat there frozen as the reality of his life crashed down around him. The love story he thought he was living was a horror movie. The woman holding his hand was holding a knife. He looked up at me, tears welled in his eyes, spilling over his cheeks. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask why, to beg for it not to be true, but no sound came out. He was shattered. He was a man who had just realized he was already dead. I took the tablet away. I grabbed his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. Do not cry, I ordered him. Not now. You can cry later. You can grieve later. Right now, you are a soldier in a war you didn't know you were fighting. He took a jagged breath, his chest heaving. Dad, he choked out. She is going to kill me. She tried, I corrected him. She failed. Because you are a Freeman, and Freemans do not die easy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the legal document Marshall had drafted. It was the waiver Brittany wanted. The surrender. She thinks she has won, I said. She thinks I am going to sign this and hand over the company. She thinks you are a vegetable who is going to have a tragic accident on the stairs tomorrow. Dante wiped his face with the back of his hand. His eyes were red, but the glassiness was gone. A spark of anger, hot and bright, ignited in his pupils. What do we do? He asked. We give her what she wants, I said. We give her the victory lap. She wants to be the star of the gala on Friday. We are going to let her. You are going to play the part Dante. You are going to be the sick invalid husband. You are going to let her wheel you onto that stage. You are going to let her gloat. And then Dante asked, his voice steadying. And then we burn her down, I said. We burn it all down in front of every donor, every investor, and every camera in the city. Dante looked at the door, then back at me. He nodded. It was a small movement, but it carried the weight of a judicial sentence. He sat up straighter. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air that didn't smell of medicine but of resolve. Get me water, he said, real water. And tell me the plan. We spent the next 10 minutes mapping out the choreography of his resurrection. I told him about the police. I told him about the toxicology report. I told him about the trap we were setting. He listened, absorbing every detail, his mind sharpening with every second. He wasn't the victim anymore. He was the CEO again. He was calculating the risk and the return. Someone tried the door handle. It rattled violently. Mr. Freeman, the nurse's voice came through the wood. "Open this door. Security!" I looked at Dante. We were out of time. "I have to go," I said. "You have to go back to sleep. You have to be convincing. If she suspects you are lucid, she will kill you tonight." "Do you understand?" "I understand," Dante said. He lay back down, adjusting the pillows. He closed his eyes, letting his features go slack, mimicking the coma he had just escaped. I moved the chair. I unlocked the door. Before I opened it, Dante spoke one last time, his eyes still closed. "Dad." "Yes, son. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was blind." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I am your shield, Dante. The shield takes the dents so the man stays safe." I opened the door. The nurse stood there, furious, a security guard behind her. I didn't wait for them to grab me. I raised my hands. "I am leaving," I said. "I just wanted to say goodbye to my son." I walked past them, my head held high. I walked out of the hospital, stripping off the blue jumpsuit as I reached the loading dock. Underneath, I was just Bernie again. But as I walked to my truck, I wasn't just an old man. I was a general who had just rallied his army. Brittany wanted a show. She wanted a tragedy. We were going to give her a masterpiece. Dante was a natural performer, but I had never seen him act for his life before. Through the hidden camera feed on my laptop, I watched my son sitting in his wheelchair in the center of his living room. He looked small, shrunken, his head lolling to the side as if his neck muscles had given up the fight against gravity. Brittany stood over him holding a pen while a lawyer from Vortex Corp sat on the sofa looking uncomfortable but greedy. "Just sign right here, baby." Brittany cooed, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness that made my stomach turn. "Just sign the paper and then we can get you back to bed. You want to rest? Do not you." Dante made a low, guttural sound. He lifted his hand, his fingers trembling violently. It was a masterpiece of physical acting. He let the pen hover over the signature line, his eyes unfocused, staring past the document at the wall. "I tired," Dante mumbled, slurring his words so heavily they were almost unintelligible. "I know, honey," Brittany said, guiding his hand down. "Just an X is fine. Or a squiggle. The lawyer said it counts. Just sign it so we can pay the doctors. We need the money for your medicine." Dante let the pen drag across the paper, creating a jagged, illegible scrawl. Then he dropped the pen and let his head fall back against the headrest of the wheelchair, closing his eyes. Brittany snatched the document away before the ink was even dry. She handed it to the lawyer, her eyes shining with triumph. "There," she said. He agreed. He signed. "It is done." The lawyer checked the signature, nodded, and shoved it into his briefcase. "I will file this first thing Monday morning, but the board wants the public announcement at the gala tomorrow night. They want to see him. They want to know the transition is amicable. He will be there," Brittany promised, looking at Dante with a mixture of disgust and satisfaction. "I will wheel him out, he will wave, and then I will accept the check. It will be the perfect send-off." I watched as the lawyer left. As soon as the door closed, Brittany's demeanor changed. She didn't help Dante back to bed. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine, leaving him sitting alone in the middle of the room. "You did good, son," I whispered to the screen. "Just hold on." I closed the laptop. I had to move. The legal trap was set, but the criminal trap needed a safety net. I drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tasted like battery acid. It was the kind of place cops went when they didn't want to be seen. Chief Marcus Sterling was waiting for me in the back booth. We had known each other for 40 years. We played football together in high school, and we had worked cases together when I was at the DOJ and he was a rookie beat cop. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deep, but when he saw me, he sat up straighter. "Bernie," he said, his voice low. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell, Marcus," I said, sliding into the booth. I placed a heavy manila envelope on the table between us. Inside were the toxicology reports from my lab, the chain of custody forms for the salt and herbs, and a flash drive containing every video Malik had pulled from the cloud. "What is this?" Marcus asked. "Evidence," I said. "Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse." And if we do not act fast, first-degree murder. Marcus opened the envelope. He scanned the mass spectrometry results. His eyebrows shot up. Arsenic digitalis Bernie. This is heavy stuff. This is not just a domestic dispute. She is killing him, Marcus, I said, leaning in. She has been poisoning him for months, and she plans to finish the job tomorrow night at the charity gala. Marcus looked at the flash drive. Is this what I think it is? Video of her grinding the pills, I confirmed. Audio of her planning the cremation. It is all there. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Then why are we sitting here eating pie? Let's go pick her up. I can have a SWAT team at her door in 20 minutes. No, I said, grabbing his wrist. If you arrest her now, she lawyers up. She claims the videos are deepfakes. She claims the salt was tampered with by a senile father-in-law who broke into her house. She walks on bail, and Dante spends the next 5 years in court while his company burns to the ground. So what do you want to do? Marcus asked, frustration coloring his tone. I want to catch her red-handed, I said. I want to catch her in the act of trying to kill him in front of 500 witnesses. I want there to be no doubt, no bail, no plea deal. It is risky, Bernie, Marcus warned. If she slips him something and we are not fast enough. She won't, I said, because I am going to make sure the weapon she uses is loaded with blanks. But I need you there. I need you and your men in plain clothes at that gala. When I give the signal, you take them down. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw the father who was willing to burn the world down to save his son. Okay, Bernie, he said, tucking the envelope into his jacket. We do it your way. But if anything goes sideways, I am kicking the doors in. I left the diner feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I had the law on my side. Now I just needed to survive the night. I returned to my basement command center. Malik was already there, typing furiously. The screens showed the interior of Dante's house. It was night now. Brittany and Gavin were in the living room. They weren't celebrating. They were arguing. He is too lucid, Gavin was saying, pacing back and forth. Did you see his eyes when he signed that paper? He was tracking the pen. He wasn't tracking the wall. He is brain damaged. Gavin, Brittany insisted, though she sounded unsure. The doctor said the hypoxia was severe. Doctors are idiots, Gavin snapped. If he gets up on that stage tomorrow and decides to speak, if he says one word that makes sense, the deal is dead. Vortex will pull out. And we go to jail for fraud. Brittany bit her lip. She looked at Dante's closed bedroom door. You are right, she whispered. We cannot take the risk. We need to make sure he goes down on that stage. Not just confused. Down. What are you thinking? Gavin asked. The toast, she said, her eyes lighting up with a dark idea. We always do a champagne toast before the keynote speech. I will hand him the glass. He drinks. 2 minutes later, he collapses. Massive heart attack. The stress of the event was too much for his weakened heart. It is tragic. It is poetic. And it happens in front of everyone, so nobody can say we did it in secret. Gavin nodded slowly. What do we use? The digitalis takes too long. Fentanyl. Brittany said, I have a patch left over from my back surgery. We extract the gel, mix it into the champagne. It is colorless, odorless. It will stop his breathing in minutes. My blood ran cold. Fentanyl. It was potent, fast, and deadly. If they used that, Dante wouldn't have a chance to play his part. He would be dead before he hit the floor. Where is the champagne? Gavin asked. It is already at the venue, Brittany said. In the private prep room behind the stage. They keep a special bottle of Dom Perignon for us in the locked cabinet. I will go early tomorrow and spike the bottle. No, Gavin said. Too risky with the caterers around. I will do it. I have the security codes for the venue. I will go tonight. I will spike the specific glass we use for him. I will keep it in my jacket.